Hello, my name's Hartmut Günther, and this is a short recording of a health and nutrition class that we've just conducted in which we focused on magnesium. The class starts with one of the participants in the group giving the presentation, and we often do this every week where someone gives the presentation, and it's a beautiful learning exercise both for the person giving the presentation and for us that are listening. After that, I facilitate a few questions and answers, and that also is a powerful learning experience. So I hope you enjoy it and happy listening. Thank you. Are you ready, Michael? You want to launch into it?
Yes, best time as ever.
Okay, that's what I reckon. Go for it.
Sorry, Brian, you can't hear me.
That's all good, man.
Okay, magnesium. Magnesium, Mg, is a chemical element alkaline. It's an earth metal, atomic number 12. Colour is a shiny grey. It's solid and resembles the other 5 elements in the second column of the periodic table. It has a high boiling point of 1097 degrees. Magnesium is the 8th most abundant element in the Earth's crust, but it doesn't occur uncombined in nature. Found in large deposits in minerals such as magnesite and dolomite. Magnesium is the 4th most abundant mineral in our body. It's needed for over 300 biochemical reactions in the body. Factors increasing for magnesium are alcoholic cirrhosis, athletes, arthritis, bowel resection, chronic alcoholism, chronic fatigue, coffee excess, diabetic acidosis, diarrhea, type 2, emotional stress, epileptics, lacking this nutrient, heart failure, excessive phytate intake, high fat and sugar intake, hyperparathyroidism, kidney stones, malignant osteobone disease, microvascular surgery, pregnancy-induced hypertension, soft tissue calcification, and sprue. Deficiency may cause or be associated with addiction, agitation, anxiety, anemia, cold hands and feet, chronic fatigue, convulsive seizures, coronary artery spasm. It can have confusion, enhanced free radical damage, inflammation or enhanced inflammation, hypertension, hypothermia, insomnia, IQ loss, irritability, stomach acidity, tremors, vertigo, kidney stones again, neurotic behaviour, poor appetite, premenstrual tension, pronounced startle response, osteoporosis, and radiation therapy can affect the deficiency. A good source of magnesium is beans, figs, parsnips, mineral water, whole grain, cereal, kelp, eggs, seeds, cashews, almonds, barley, cod, and dark chocolate. But the highest concentrate is in baby spinach, collard greens, kale, and swift chard, and also bok choy. There are 10 different forms of magnesium. There's magnesium citrate, which is easily absorbed in the digestive tract and has a lactic. Magnesium oxide, which is a short-term relief of heartburn, but it's poorly absorbed in the digestive tract. Magnesium chloride, which is a salt, it's an unstable element, but it binds well with the other elements. Magnesium lactate is self-formed when it binds with lactic acid. It's also a preserving agent and also helps with muscle tissue and heart valves and arteries. Magnesium malate, it occurs naturally in fruit and wine, and sometimes it's used as a flavouring. Magnesium taurotate contains amino acid taurine and may help control blood sugar. Magnesium L-theorate, which may support brain health, memory loss, and depression. There's magnesium sulfate, which is commonly referred to as Epsom salts, which often is used for muscle relaxant or stress. And then magnesium glycinate, which is formed from elemental magnesium and the amino acid glutamine. It's employed in the body for protein extraction and refers occurs in foods such as fish, dairy, meat, and legumes. And then the last one is magnesium orate, which includes orate acid, which is involved in the construction of genetic material, including your DNA, and promotes a healthy heart and blood vessels. If deficient of magnesium, obtaining this mineral from whole foods is the best initial strategy, as up to 90% is lost due to processing foods. Synergistic nutrients are vitamins B, B6, C, D, glucose polymer, potassium, boron and calcium. Concentrated storage sites in the body are bone, muscle, liver, pancreas, non-muscle soft tissue, and 70% of the tissue magnesium is stored in is your bones and your teeth. Interesting facts about magnesium is that it once was thought to be the same element as calcium. Magnesium fire is very difficult to put out as it can burn in nitrogen, carbon dioxide and water, and it's often used in flares and fireworks because of its bright white light. Hello.
That's it. Thank you. Awesome. I have never heard of so many magnesium compounds. That is fantastic. You know, different ways, particularly in the supplements. So thanks for sharing that, Michael. That was awesome. I might just open it first to the class. Anyone have any questions? And questions like Michael read off a fair list of medical related things, symptoms and conditions related to magnesium. Some of you may not know what they were. So was anything there? I'm not saying I know everything, but I can help translate something that seems hard to understand. Okay. Great. One of the, what's phytate? Michael mentioned high phytate intake will affect magnesium absorption. You don't have to answer this, Michael, just opening up to the other guys. Anyone? What?
Can you repeat that part?
What was that?
What was the question? High phytate.
Yeah, what's phytate? Michael mentioned that foods high in phytate will decrease magnesium absorption.
Do you want me to answer it or you can answer it?
No, I want, if it's possible, the other three participants in the class. Anyone know?
Don't know.
Never heard of it? Okay. All right.
No.
Did you want to comment on it, Michael?
I've just written a few things down for questions and that, and I thought that would be one of them.
Right.
So phytic acid is found in plant seeds, but the main storage of it is in phosphorus. And phytic acid, which is hexophosphate, insoluble, IP6, that's all I've got.
Okay, so without getting too technical, but it is related to phosphate. It's part of vegetables, particularly legumes and seeds, as Michael mentioned. And if the legume or the grain, it's high in grains as well, is not treated properly, this is one of the core things of food. And you know, indigenous cultures over millennium have learnt this and know this, how to treat and prepare foods so that you maximize the nutrition. So you also, as well as maximizing nutrition, you decrease the effect of natural things in the food that will stop you from absorbing the key nutrients, or decrease toxins that, and I don't mean man-made toxins, I mean toxins that are naturally in foods. So you know, the wealth of knowledge over thousands of years from different cultures, of course, including the Australian Indigenous people, know these things. Sometimes it takes 3 days to prepare a food before you can eat it. So we've lost in the Western diet, so to speak, and in our cultures, a lot of that understanding. Everything's become quick and processed. So both nutrients are both lost, and things that we shouldn't be having are still in there. And phytates, even though it's natural, normal, contains phosphorus, which we need, can bind things like magnesium, grab them, stick, and magnesium and calcium and other minerals, stick to it, and we poo it out. So it robs us, if it's not treated properly, or if there's too much of it in the food, of getting those particular nutrients. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, for instance, I'm into beans. It's just my thing. My name's not Jack, but I'm definitely into beans. I grow them, prepare them, research them. Been doing it for a long time here in Armidale, and we grow them, by the way, there at Freeman House as well. Now's the end of the season, so it's not the right time to grow beans. But by the way, just as a little plug there, while I just said that, there's a little garden. I don't know if anyone's utilising it outside. But you can grow things yourself if you want to. And if anyone doesn't know about that or wants to do that, let me know and I can help organise that. I just bought some seeds myself from the health food store. Graham, you're into it, are you?
Yeah, well, you know, it's got peas out there now.
Nice one, nice one. So beans is a good example. And when I mean beans, I don't mean the green beans. I mean the seeds inside them, which are called legumes. And you get like kidney beans and chickpeas and soya beans and bolotti beans, which I'm just soaking at the moment. So if you know how to prepare them properly, and the cultures in India and South America and Africa, they know how to, and the Mediterranean, they know how to prepare them properly, meaning that you soak them. A lot of people know that, for a day or half a day. Then you do another thing, which is missed out a lot, and that is that you allow them to germinate. And that germination is not the same as sprouting, but it's the start of sprouting. So germination means the seed or the legume or the nut or the grain develops a little shoot that's half the length of the seed or the bean or the grain. Very, very small. So, and that process significantly cuts down the anti-nutrients in the grain or the legume. And one of the anti-nutrients is phytate that Michael has mentioned. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And your gutty-wutty loves you because you've done that. You won't be farting like crazy, you won't be burping, you won't be feeling bloated and all that, because those are all symptoms, the bloating, the farting and all that, of eating food that's not properly prepared. So we get in and do some of that stuff once they open the doors again to Freeman House. We do a lot of cooking things.
What about like having too many different nutrients, like overloading the bowel system? Does that also, like raw weight and things like that, to take protein shakes and all that kind of stuff? Is that another cause of like filthy farts?
Yeah, well, if you're eating food that doesn't digest properly, and if you're talking specifically about protein shakes, that can definitely be an issue. Because there's a whole range of protein shakes out there. A lot of them are not very good, I have to tell you. And some of them are contaminated with nasty things. I've done some research on that. So you have to know which ones to get and how they're prepared and all that sort of stuff. So unless you're supplementing, it's not really possible to overload your gut with too many nutrients, but it is possible to overload your gut with things you can't digest properly. Absolutely. So, and if you find that's happening to you, well, cut it back, cut it in half, stop eating it,
Yeah.
taking it.
I don't take it. I just heard that.
Yeah. I'd be real careful with protein powders. There's only a couple that I would recommend, and I've done that in the past, particularly for vegans and vegetarians. Brad, yep.
What are the best ones?
What was that?
Protein. What are the best ones for protein shakes?
Okay. There's a couple of them. There's a brand called Raw, R-A-W. It's organic. I definitely recommend organic. It's sold in the health food shops. I think both health food shops in Armidale, the Go Vita and Chrissy's, which is called Monk's, which is near Coles. So one health food shop's near Coles and the other one's near Woolies. They both sell it. That's the brand. And they do, I've noticed that they've expanded their range, but my suggestion is always keep it as simple as possible. The more complex a food get, in other words, like it's a chocolate flavor or it's a vanilla flavor or whatever, there's an added potential to add something in there that you don't want. There's another one called Vital Greens, another brand. I think that's Australian, although they might have expanded a bit. That's also, they have an organic one. And the main ingredient that I'd recommend is pea protein powder. And they have organic pea protein powder. They may not be labeling it still as organic. So you just need to check that out. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be necessarily good if it's not organic, but the preference is to go with organic whenever you can. Yeah, so I use those, the pea protein powder, and there's also a carob powder one because they're what they call low allergenic. So people who might come to see me in the clinic don't want to eat things like whey protein or soybean protein, which, by the way, are the two main protein powders out there. Soybeans and whey. Whey is milk-based protein. So for people who are more sensitive to allergies, they're a problem. So, and then while we're on that subject, a relevant question I would be asking is, why do you want to take protein powder? I'll direct that at you, Brad.
I do a fair bit of training, and I've never used it before, but I've just started. I want to start using it just to build muscle.
Yeah.
That's my main aim.
Okay. Well, sorry, go on.
Not to bulk up, just build muscle. I've never been a real fan of them. I just usually eat tuna and rice or kidney beans and stuff like that, and just put it all together and try and get what I need out of that.
Yeah.
After training.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really good point, because you've brought up a whole field that I've got earmarked for us to start talking about next week. Meaning, because what you're saying there is that you want to increase your muscle mass, which what flows into that is obviously protein. You need protein to increase muscle mass. Well, the other main ingredient in increasing muscle mass is to actually use your muscles, because people think that, and to some degree, if you eat a high protein diet, yes, that will have an effect on pushing you more towards making sure that you've got enough muscle mass, but it's not enough. And it's also not enough just to exercise, which is probably what you're thinking, Brad, because then, ripping and burning, weight bearing, all that sort of stuff. So you're building your muscle through the exercise, but then you've got to have an input. You've got to have food that feeds in, that supplies protein to build those muscle. So that's a huge area. So all of us, except for Brad, but maybe he can take this baton next week, I thought of shifting the tack because we've been focusing on minerals and vitamins there's about 28 essential, and we've defined what essential means and all that sort of thing. I thought, why don't we change, because there's 4 of us now, into someone taking on fat, someone taking on carbs, and someone taking on protein. Fat's a huge area, so maybe 2, well, actually, no, just leave it at that. And so what I'm proposing, if you're up for it, Brad, and since you've already stuck your foot in it, so to speak, are you okay giving us a bit of a talk on protein next week?
Yeah.
You okay with that? Okay, so as you can see by the other members in the group and what you've heard so far, there's no pressure on you. It can be a 2-minute talk, it can be a half an hour talk. Anything to do with protein, try to answer the question like, why do we need protein? That's a good question. And another question is, how much protein do we actually need? That's another really good question. Because in you doing this and presenting it to the group, you will be able to then answer your own question about the protein powders and how much you should actually take and how much do you need and all that sort of stuff. And then always designing ahead here, any volunteers then for fat? Anyone got a burning ambition? I must warn you, there's Dean already putting up his hand. Okay, that's fantastic. So
I need to get some more fat, so yeah, I'll do that one.
You can have some of mine.
yes, they'll have that in the future where you can transplant fat and donate it to someone else. Yeah, give that. So maybe you want to go again after Brad, Dean, next week?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, that's great.
So what the answer about it? Why we need it?
What was that?
What questions about fat
Okay.
would I be answering?
So fat's a little bit more complicated. No, that's probably not the right word, but let's put it this way. What sort of fats are there? That's the first question to answer, because that will take you down a rabbit hole and hopefully we'll see you emerging in 2 weeks' time. So and then, well, which ones well, here's a good one. Which of all those different varieties of fat are essential? Do I need any of them? Do we need fat? So that's a good question. And then another question might be, well, how much fat do I need? And one last question is fat, and you don't have to answer this, what are the health implications of having too much fat? That'll keep you. What?
Or too little?
Yes, exactly. And partly, yeah, you'll be able to answer that when you do the other question of like, well, are any fats essential? So, the old adage, I want a volunteer, and I'm going to say Graham's name there. Graham, are you up for informing us and educating us about carbs?
Yeah, I can do that.
You okay with that? And a spoiler, carbs ties in with fats. So too little, too many carbs. Here's the spoiler. Both fat and carbs are our main energy sources. And we need either one of them or both of them to supply us with energy. And here's a spoiler for you, Brad. Protein is an energy source, but you don't want it to be an energy source. So there you go. That'll give you something to go on. And we'll save whatever comes up then for Michael in 4 weeks' time. Are you guys planning on all being here still for another 3 or 4 weeks?
Certainly don't plan on coming.
Yeah, 3-4 months at least, man.
Okay, good. Well, that's, if you're going to be in a place in this environment, this current climate, that's pretty good. Who was it? Sam, I think, mentioned that they may be opening Freeman to some local residents. Have you guys heard that?
Yeah.
I don't know if any have come already. Do you know?
I believe so.
I guess they'd have to quarantine or detox, and because Freeman House has got such a good detox facility, it's probably also a very good quarantining facility. It's pretty isolated up there. It just occurred to me too that it is actually, I don't know how they're doing it. I haven't talked to anyone except for Sam. It just occurred to me that if you guys hear of anyone in the detox facility, because one thing they've communicated to me over the years is pretty boring and pretty lonely up there. So there's a way that people can join this class without, and Graham was just touching the way, it's a mobile phone. And you can join this class from your own bedroom with your mobile phone. You can see everything, we can see, you can hear everything. So put that out there if anyone, if you come across anyone or hear of anyone, and I'll put it out there as well with Sam and Elodie as well, just to make it easier, because there's nothing more severe in being isolated, literally, particularly if you're not used to it. So, okay, back to Michael and magnesium. The way that Michael presented that with all the things that can go wrong, I was thinking, bloody magnesium should be on the news once a week. I mean, it's so important.
It's actually something like out to 49% of the population is a magnesium deficiency.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's what I was, sort of feeling when Graham was giving his talk on vitamin C last week. All these people really getting hammered in these nursing homes and old people's homes and retirement homes. I mean, we know that increasing your nutrition, particularly with vitamin C, but all the other aspects can definitely help. So it's just that you don't hear this. So it's a golden opportunity. I just made a couple of points, Graham. Sorry, Michael. You went through a whole list of various forms of magnesium. I don't know if many of us have heard of all those forms. I've pretty much heard of all of them, but I didn't know of some of them in relation to magnesium. So one of the ones, and you guys can write this down if you want, but if you're going to spend money on a supplement, make sure it's a bloody good supplement. And as Michael was both mentioning and alluding to, not all supplements are equally absorbed. And that applies, as we just spoke about, phytate as well. So if you're going to get a supplement, spend good money on it, get one that's been optimized so you're not pissing it out or you're not pooing it out. You're actually going to get your money's worth. And from my experience, from my understanding, magnesium citrate or magnesium citramate is the best one. The brand that I recommend, not much more expensive than the other stuff at the pharmacies and Woolies, is Thorn. It's called Thorn Research. So if you want to buy a supplement yourself, and I obviously supply those for my clients, but if you want to bypass me, you can go straight to iHerb, iHerb1word.com. It's about as cheap as you'll get it, and they have a whole range. Don't get overwhelmed, stay focused. type in Thorn Research Magnesium. Thorn Research is the company in America that make it. They're a research company. They're not just flogging supplements. iHerb is just a logistics thing. It's like Amazon. They don't make any of the food or supplements they sell. They just logistically distribute around the world. So that's what I'd recommend. And that's what I've got in my fridge when I feel or sense that I need some more magnesium based on what's been going on in my life. So, okay, that makes sense? It's worth the money. Another way, and also Michael mentioned this, is magnesium sulfate or Epsom salts. Who's had a bath in Epsom salts? Anyone? Yeah. Well, it sounds like everyone, except me. I've never had one. I've yet to do it. So you can absorb some magnesium dermally. Dermally means skin, through your skin. Not as much as you can taking it orally, but there is and you can actually buy what they call magnesium oil. Magnesium doesn't exist as an oil per se, but it has an oily feel. It's quite strong, and you can rub it on your legs. Like people sometimes just rub it on their calf muscle. Calf muscle, it's called the gastrocnemius, is one of the largest muscles in the body, not the largest. So people who have muscle cramps, for instance, one of the antidotes to muscle cramps, restless legs, is magnesium. So you can do it that way if you don't want to take it orally, because I don't know if Michael mentioned, he might have just touched on it. You can take too much magnesium. Did you look into that, Michael? What are the downsides of too much magnesium?
Like increased heart rate. I think it has an effect on the calcium that's produced from that whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Magnesium. What was that?
I was just going to say what the recommended dose was for adults, 420 milligrams.
That's right. Yeah, that's about the RDI. It varies between 300 and 400, sort of depending on your age and stuff like that. So, and most supplements have between 150 to 300 or 400, something like that. The magnesium and vitamin C are two of the nutrients that are fairly non-toxic, meaning you can take a lot of them. So if you, and I'm not saying you should take a lot of them, but if you take a high dose of either vitamin C or magnesium, it gives you diarrhea. So there's a sort of consensus among practitioners that, well, how do you know how much magnesium to give someone? One of the things is you dose it until they start getting loose stools, and that applies to both magnesium and vitamin C. So it's you're sort of conducting a clinical trial of one with your client. That may sound horrific, but that is actually what goes on in medicine every time you get prescribed a medication. Of course, the medications and the supplements have been tested and trialed as well. Any questions? I've got a couple of groovy slides just to reiterate some of those things. I just want to make sure that that actually works. Let's just try that again. Great. And I'll just pump that up. Right. Everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Yep.
So what, just for the last few minutes, hopefully this doesn't seem too dry, but just in a couple of the things, this is just me complementing what Michael presented there, just some other aspects of magnesium, but also how these nutrients tie in together. And Michael, you mentioned last week, and first of all, let me just ask, are you comfortable in me talking about you personally, meaning, you know,
Yeah, sure.
you okay with that? Okay. So Michael mentioned last week he was concerned about hypertension. Hypertension means high blood pressure, and that he'd actually started. Is that still the case? Some sort of medication to help with that?
I'm on the third day.
Okay. All right. So, and I don't know if that's why you chose magnesium, but there's some evidence that magnesium in the correct amount has a beneficial effect on blood pressure. Is that why you chose magnesium?
No, I didn't know that it was anything to do with blood pressure, but I soon found out.
Yeah. Okay. And every now and then I just like to interweave, because it's sort of like we're getting a worm's eye view of something like magnesium, and then it's good to just zoom out and get a bird's eye view, meaning that it's really about food and our health and looking after ourselves, and that how these nutrients tie in with foods and different things like that. So I just wrote this thing. It says, what makes a nutrient essential is the fact that in their absence, or more accurately, in their lower amounts than optimal, less than optimal amounts, we age quicker, move slower, think poorer, and attract chronic health issues easier. That's really true. It can be all of those or one of those. Importantly, the body can't make these essential nutrients. We have to get them from food. It's really important. I just thought I'd activate people's brains by showing you this slide. And no, that's not a misspelling. It's not meant to be chops or schnapps. Don't mean to trigger anyone there. Anyone know what that is?
Yeah, it's chemical compounds of it.
Very good. You know what they are?
Calcium, hydrogen, probably nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus. What's the S?
Sulfur.
Sulfur. There you go.
And the C is actually carbon. Calcium is, we'll get on to calcium in a minute. Calcium is Ca. Those are actually those are atoms. And what I'm doing here is not trying to give you a chemistry lesson or anything like that, but just to provide context of how all this ties in with nutrition. And it's really interesting. So when we understand the human body, we might look at it abstractly, but sometimes it's just helpful. These are the actual size of the atoms, like N there for nitrogen, as Graham said. That's the size relative to sulfur. Those rings represent what's called the electrons. An atom is made up of the nucleus, which is the bit inside, which is protons and neutrons, and then the electrons that spin around it. And the most simplest atom in the universe is hydrogen, because it's on there and it only has one proton and one electron, and then it goes up from there. So I saw the reason I put this up, I thought it was really interesting, and there's another slide in a moment just showing this in the human body. There was a Catalyst episode on the ABC about meteorites and minerals falling to Earth from outer space, and they analysed meteorites for this CHNOPS. CHNOPS is the acronym for those 6 particular minerals. And if a meteorite contains these 6 minerals, there's a high probability. By the way, why show these 6 minerals? There's over 100 different minerals and atoms and nutrients and elements. Why show these 6? Because these 6 are the predominant, not the only ones, predominant minerals and nutrients and elements that comprise biological life, biology on Earth, and potentially that's why the astrobiologists are getting interested on other planets as well. So there's a huge amount of research going into the study of this sort of composition in meteorites to see if there's things. So carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur make up most biological molecules on Earth. All are non-metals. Sulfur is contained in amino acids cysteine and methionine. Brad might come across this next week, because in the talk, when you talk about protein, you'll be talking about amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So it just gets really interesting. And there's 20 amino acids approximately that make up all the protein in all human and animal life and non-animal life. But only 2 of them contain sulfur, cysteine and methionine. So it's interesting. So jumping back to Brad's question about protein powders have to have a balanced amino acid profile, and they'll list things like the amounts of cysteine and methionine in the profile. You'll see it on the label. It's really groovy stuff. Phosphorus is contained in phospholipid bilayers of cell membranes. Dean, in his first talk on thiamine, mentioned ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And Dean said that so well. That's the energy currency in the body. It's a little molecule. So phosphorus, phosphate. Phosphate means phosphorus plus oxygen atoms. So phosphorus is contained also in the phospholipid bilayers of cell membranes. This is just providing some overview, some context of how we work. If you have this context, it's much more interesting and easier to put some life into a normally boring thing like magnesium or manganese. By the way, magnesium and manganese are not the same thing. Does everyone know that?
Yeah.
Great. Manganese is also an essential nutrient, but you don't need as much of it as magnesium. We've got over 1 trillion cells in our body, and they've all got membranes, well, except for red blood cells to some degree. And those membranes, there's a hidden word in membranes. It's brains. I know it's not spelt the same way as our brains, but there's a clue there. Membranes, in some sense, the cell's brain and its border security. So whatever goes in and out of your cells, and that includes magnesium, it goes sometimes pumped in and pumped out. In actual fact, magnesium is pumped in because it's mostly an intracellular nutrient. That is the role and job of the membrane. Pretty interesting stuff. Phosphate groups are also an essential component of the backbone of nucleic acids, in other words, DNA and RNA. So this gives us an idea of how important these things are. And as I mentioned, and as Dean mentioned, it's required for ATP. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what your body is made of in relation to these elements and nutrients, there it is. Can everyone read that?
Just,
Yeah.
Just, yeah. It may come as a surprise. The main thing you're actually made of is oxygen. It may be surprising since you're a solid thing, and oxygen is normally perceived as a gas that we breathe in, keeps us alive. But per weight, not necessarily per the amount of atoms, but per weight. And that is because we are about 70% water. And of course, water is H2O, which is oxygen, and hydrogen, which is the third one down there. So as a percent mass, carbon is the second one. And if you recall the size of those atoms there, you'll see there's a difference. Even though you're only about 10% hydrogen per weight, you are 62% hydrogen in regards to the amount of hydrogen atoms compared to other atoms in your body, which is, I never saw or thought of it like that. I'm not a complete nerd, you know. It may sound like it, but what I'm trying to do here is just provide a little bit of context in regards to some of the nutrients. And right down the bottom there, what Michael spoke about today is magnesium. So magnesium only makes up 0.1% of your body weight, and it's only 0.015% of the amount of atoms. So it's not a main nutrient, not as main as calcium, for instance, and it's certainly not as main as carbon or even hydrogen. So all the other nutrients, and this is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We've got 28 essential nutrients. They all fall into that less than 1%. So it just gives you some context. With that amount of oxygen, 65%, I wouldn't be surprised if that guy is just walking around floating on air. We should be bouncing around like that. Never thought of it like that. All right. Just before we finish, I can't see the time. Anyone got the time?
Yeah, 25 to 11.
Is it?
It is
Wow.
9:85.
I got wrong.
Right, that's all right.
I'm going to
Okay, so we'll just finish with this because just to make it real, even though it is real, I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but that is what we call a buckwheat pancake. We've made these there where you are. And we do that. We can't just do it right now. So we've made, so obviously in the context, this is not it doesn't look like a white fluffy pancake made with white flour because it's not made with white flour. But it's bloody delicious. It melts in your mouth and it's what we call nutrient dense. And I brought this up again, just to interweave another part of learning, try to eat foods that are as nutrient dense, not just energy dense, because after a while, if you can think like everything you put in your mouth, if you keep coming to these classes, you'll be thinking, oh, what nutrients does that contain? Which initially may be annoying, but after a while, it just becomes second nature. So this is, I analyzed white flour, you can see that, white flour crepes, which I'll show you the recipe in a moment, which is very standard. Anywhere, if you go out anywhere and get pancakes, that's what you get, white flour pancakes. Whereas the pancakes that we made, and I'll show you the recipe in a moment, are what we call nutrient-dense gluten-free pancakes. So they're not aimed necessarily to be gluten-free, but they just turned out to be gluten-free because they don't contain any wheat. They contain buckwheat, but buckwheat doesn't contain gluten. So it's interesting. So not only do you get an extra amount of nutrients, now here on the left of this, it's got magnesium. I had to put it on its side because it was too small. The green one is the magnesium amount compared to RDI. So it's about 10-20% of the RDI for the white crepe, compared to over 100% for the nutrient dense. In other words, eating a serve, and I don't mean eating 10 crepes. I mean a serve. A serve is about maybe 1.5, 2 crepes. So if you eat 1.5 to 2 crepes of this recipe I'm about to show you, you will get 100% of your intake of magnesium. And that's bloody extraordinary. And not only that, you can see the other nutrients there. The only nutrient that was higher was selenium in the white, but that is also highly variable because selenium gets taken up by wheat, but it's soil dependent. And a lot of Australia is depleted. Soils are depleted in selenium. So that's just an average representation. But the take-home message is, look at that. It's significant nutrient. So what is it? What is the recipe? This is the recipe for the whole grain one. But before I do that, that's the recipe for the white flour one, which is, I'm sure most of you or all of you probably try to make crepes or made crepes. You've got children or grandchildren or even for yourself. So that's the sort of normal ingredient. The only extra thing in there is ricotta cheese. And so because I'm comparing these two recipes, I had to make them equivalent on everything that was the same. So the other recipe you'll see in a moment has ricotta cheese in it. So ricotta cheese is a low-fat, high-protein cheese that adds nice texture and binding. And just if you eat these things, I hope we'll get a chance to make these while you're still there. Or you guys can make them if you're interested. We'll set it up to do it that way. They just melt in your mouth. It's just incredible. So that's the white one. That's the nutrient dense recipe. So you can see some things. Anyone ask some questions? There may be some things you don't recognize in there. Anyone? Anything?
Amaranth.
Amaranth. Amaranth is very high in magnesium. Did you come across that, Michael?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, in the book, in the book you got there, the Food Synergy book. If you go look under grains, amaranth is right on top. I've actually tried to grow amaranth. Well, I have grown it here in my backyard. It's actually rated as a weed. It's actually rated as a noxious weed in the New England area. But it's an interesting grain. So these grains and seeds like amaranth, oats, buckwheat, they're grains that provide the substitute for normal wheat, white flour. And these are all whole grains. I have ground all these up in this recipe in a coffee grinder. And if you recall, Michael said that a lot of the processing, when they process white flours and flours in general, a lot of the nutrients are actually lost, particularly magnesium. So you can't, by the way, grind normal wheat in a coffee grinder. It's too hard. But all of these, like buckwheat, is an amazing grain. It comes out smooth and silky, and so does amaranth. The others, flaxseed or linseed, anyone know about that or had that or used that?
Yeah.
If anyone's having smoothies, you should be putting that in your smoothie. And who's ever going to do fat, and that's actually Dean, will be able to enlighten us on the benefits of flaxseed and linseed, because it's very high in an essential fat nutrient. No spoilers, but you'll find that out. So it's almost like, except for the brown sugar, everything here is nutrient dense. Chia seeds are similar to flax seeds in that they've also got that particular thing, but they're high in fiber and they're also high in magnesium, and so are sunflower seeds. So and these are all also grounded up in the coffee grinder. They're not bought as powders that have been sitting for months on a shelf in a supermarket. That's really important, just to increase your health. And of course, there's an egg in there as well. Okay, we might leave it at that today. I was going to talk about, I had some things about blood pressure and magnesium and potassium. If you're interested, we can do that next week, or I can give you those resources, Michael, if you're interested in that. Or if you're interested, ask me next week and we can spend just a couple of minutes at the start of the class, because I discovered something quite interesting about tomato paste and potassium yesterday, just accidentally, when I was going through the slides, going through and preparing for this particular class today. So any questions?
All good.
All good. Why don't we leave that then, and looking forward to Brad's talk next week on protein. And Michael, can you give those? Oh, you've already given them to Brad, the books. Yeah, great, awesome. Yeah, don't stress about it, Brad. Just relax. Whatever you give us, we'll appreciate and gobble it up.
Yeah.
All right. See you on the mindfulness class next Wednesday. Again, Brad's asked us to look at awareness, and we will be doing that. Thanks a lot. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for coming. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Art.
No sweat.
Have a good day.
You too. You too.